Before the ENDOF day prayer, Miss Alvarez called Jangir to her desk. He could smell her perfume as she handed him an envelope. Knees unsteady, he returned to his seat and slipped it into his school bag. The Catholic boys closed their eyes and made the sign of the cross. A few others imitated them indifferently. The rest put their hands together. The class began chanting, "We give thee thanks, Almighty God." Jangir trembled, forgetting the words he repeated every day. He was sure the note could be about one thing only. Teacher had said, "Please give this to your parents." He'd heard sadness in her voice. "Yes, teacher," he'd mumbled. But he didn't give it to his mother on getting home. He waited, and was glad he did, for his father was in a good mood, which meant now she would be happy too, and things would be easier with the note. It frightened him to think what might have happened if Daddy had been like he was that day when he threatened to tie Mummy up. He pushed the sealed envelope at him. "What's this?" "From Miss Alvarez." "Why?" "Open it, Yezda, you'll ND out," said his mother, prompting him as one would a child. Probably Jihangu has come RST again in a test or something. He turned to the balcony to hide his face as his father tore open the envelope and read aloud. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Chenoe, I would be grateful if either one of you would be able to see me tomorrow. Besides regular class hours from 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., I will also be available for an hour before assembly. Please accept my apologies for the inconvenience. Yours sincerely, Helen Alvarez, STD, 4A. "Why is she calling us?" Jihangu asked his mother. "I don't know. Are you hiding something?" "No." "So will you go?" asked Yezad. "How can I? Who'll stay with Papa?" Sighing, he told Jangir to let Miss Alvarez know he would be there tomorrow at 4:30. In the empty classroom, Miss Alvarez's high heels echoed sharply as she descended the platform and shook hands. "I'm sorry to make you come all the way, Mr. Chenoe, but it's quite a serious matter." Her appearance reassured him. How serious a matter could he possibly hear about from one who looked so pretty? He thought of his own school days. They hadn't invented such lovely teachers then. His time at St. Xavier's was led with masters named Mr. Lobo and Mr. Mascarenas and Mr. Montero, big mustached disciplinarians. Nothing resembling a Helen Alvarez. Jangir lingered in the corridor outside, and she called him in. "I still ND it hard to believe that my best student was involved with those other boys," she started reluctantly. Yezad smiled, wondering what sort of mischief the youngsters had been up to, part of him pleased that Jihangla was in it with his peers. No sense being goody-goody all the time. Childhood. Boyhood wasn't complete if the rascals didn't get into trouble. He'd been the same during his own years in this school. And the classrooms had hardly changed. Rows of empty desks stretched behind Miss Alvarez, he could see them over her shoulder. That schoolboy smell of sweat and youthfulness and food stew was in the air, ammoniac, mingled with traces of ink, snack time biscuits, lunchtime sandwiches, puri bhaji, ragda patties. Permeating everything, occupying the room as solidly as the furniture, a timeless smell. Suddenly, Yezid's own youth was upon him. Memory began to populate the empty benches with faces from the past. Those happy days, when a week of school was a lifetime, rich and complete. In a week, strangers might become dear friends, battles could be lost and won, whole kingdoms acquired, for time worked errantly then. How slowly the seasons changed then, from one monsoon to another seemed an eternity, the skies pouring endless rain, the only bright spot the chance of a holiday if the roads got ooded. And when that happened, you were always warned to stay away from the curb, keep to the inside of the footpath, because drain covers could be missing, stolen and sold for scrap, and every year children were swept away in the sewers. The buses and cars, half submerged, looked like strange boats navigating an inland sea. And it was an adventure to wade through the perils of waste. High water, through the murk and oating rubbish, pretending it was the Amazon where the anaconda lurked. Performing feats of unimaginable bravery, you reached higher ground, ding civilization when you arrived home to hot tea and a snack and a holiday. "So you see, Mr. Chenoe, it's my most important project," said Miss Alvarez. His name pulled him back into the present. She was talking about homework monitoring. He remembered Jangir explaining it at Nariman's birthday party. Barely 4 months ago, seemed so much longer. He faked a concerned nod. "It sounds very interesting. And I had such high hopes for the class. But now I have to suspend the project. You see, 3 boys who didn't do their homework gave money to the monitor to get good marks." Jangir scrutinized his father's shoes, his own, and Miss Alvarez's, which revealed her toes, each crowned with a lovely little ruby. Then the tears made his eyes blurry, and the rubies became one long crimson smear. Meanwhile, Yezed tut-tutted and shook his head to show disapproval. He wondered what was Jihangla's role. Not the bribing, he had no money, besides, his homework was always done, and he was a homework monitor. The incipient thought froze in his mind. "Did you catch the 3? "Yes." "Also the monitor who took the money." And as she spoke, her arm went up and embraced her pupil's shoulders. She was able to make it a gesture of identication and protection. Yezid's eyebrows rose as he looked at his son, then at Miss Alvarez. She nodded sadly. "I don't know what to say." The classroom smell nauseated him now as he looked again at Jangir for explanation. But Jangir's eyes were still studiously examining footwear. "I was just as shocked when I found out," said Miss Alvarez. "Not by those 3, they're such do airs." She blushed at her word. "I mean, they're hopeless in their studies because they don't care. They come from rich families, parents who think money will get them everything in life. But Jangir was my golden boy." She swallowed. "When I discovered that every week he was taking 60 rupees, 20 from each of the 3, I was so upset. 60. She had said 60. Yezad stopped listening. 60 was the difference between what he put in the envelopes and what Roxy found. And I wanted to lay a RM foundation for my boys, make honesty a permanent part of their character. So they would be able, as adults, to resist the corruption in our society. Especially those who might enter politics or the IAS. Instead, that very evil has already infected my classroom. How will things ever get better for our country? Yezed mumbled how sorry he was, and promised to make sure Jangir learned his lesson from the incident. This morning I woke up feeling I should give up teaching, said Miss Alvarez. What's the use, I asked myself, if my best pupil can be tempted into doing wrong. You must never give up, Miss Alvarez. You are a wonderful teacher, Jangir has told us all about you, and how much he likes you. He says you are the best teacher he's ever had. Now Jangir began to cry, silently RST, then with sobs that made his shoulders convulse. I'm sorry, teacher, he whispered. She smiled. I think I will keep on teaching. And I hope you will learn from this big mistake. Yazid assured her nothing like it would ever happen again. He gave her his personal assurance. She said she wished all parents were as cooperative, and thanked him for coming. The wait was agonizing. He wanted them to punish him quickly, get angry with him. Instead, his father kept squeezing his shoulder, saying things like, it's okay, Jihangla, don't worry, and his mother pressed him to her side and said, my poor child, he frets just like a grown-up. It was her fault, she insisted, for letting him see the envelopes. She was to blame for his finding out how little money there was. That was all, no scolding or slaps. And it left him feeling horrible. Then they began bickering between themselves, laying the blame where it wouldn't quite tea. To listen to them hurt each other because of what he had done was going to be his punishment, Jangir realized. See what your disgraceful half-sister and brother have done, said Yezid. A child of 9 has to take part in bribery and corruption. Don't exaggerate, said Roxana. Some bad boys owe Jihangu money, and he accepted it to help his family, end of story. No need to twist it and turn it and make it into something ugly. But it is ugly. And there's only one way to explain it. The same corruption that pollutes this country is right here, in your own family, in Zhao and Kumi's shameless trickery and betrayal. Think of the example they have set. Is it any wonder Jihangla took the bribe? Do you know what nonsense you are talking? Can you hear yourself? Our son did not take money to buy bubble gum or ice cream for himself. He did it to help his parents with food, and with his grandpa's medicines. So it's all my fault. Because I cannot provide enough to run this deluxe nursing home for your father. I didn't say that. Then Yezid said if 10 years ago he could have looked into the future, he would never have given up on his Canadian dream. He would have tried again and again. That racist immigration Osair could not have blocked his way forever. And they would all be living happily right now in Toronto, breathing the pure Rocky Mountain air instead of the noxious fumes of this dying city, rotting with pollution and garbage and corruption. And Roxana said, did he think Canada was a land of living saints? And so far as she knew, the Rocky Mountains were still in Alberta, unless the government had quietly shifted them to Ontario. One night, the slip embarrassed Yezid, and he said very good, full marks in geography, and now he wanted to talk no more about this. He would go to the balcony for some peace and quiet. No, not balcony, he corrected himself. They didn't have one anymore, they had a joped patty. Why do you say needlessly nasty things, she appealed. Why must you call the children's tent something they enjoy, a joped patty? Just look at it, Villy's smelly old plastic tablecloth. Go to any slum, you'll ND plastic is the building material. What can I call this but a joped patty? Call it what you like, I've no time to argue. I still have to go to market, buy potatoes, cook dinner. What were you doing all afternoon? Ballroom dancing. What do you think? Papa needed a sponge bath. You know how long that takes? And changing the sheets with him in the bed? If I don't do it, you complain about smell. The room is still smelling. Non-stop he farts. What do you feed him? Same thing I feed you. But his stomach doesn't work as well. You'll see when you get old. Now put a curse on me. Why is it a curse? You're never getting old? Murad. Jangir. Open your books. I want to see your homework nished when I get back. On the balcony Yezid saw Roxana emerge from the building with her basket, his eyes following her the way hers used to follow him when he left for work every morning, when they still would wave to each other. She stepped over the footpath and he almost shouted, wait. There are cars coming. But she had seen them and stepped back up to the curb. He sighed with relief. She watched for a break in the stream of Tracy, then rushed across. She moved with the awkward scurry of an exhausted person, and it hurt him to watch. Her shoulders looked so stooped from up here. His darling Roxana. Slowly her loveliness was being erased by the burden upon her, and he couldn't protect her from it. Why, in his thoughts, did he feel nothing but love for her, yet, when she was before him, quarrel and animosity came out of his mouth, as though she were the enemy? Time passed as he stood on the balcony and saw the clouds assume the color of the evening. The setting sun was painting copper edges around them. He looked at the chaos of television cables and radio antennae and electrical connections and telephone lines spread out against the sky. Fitting, he thought, for a city that was chaos Persona edition. This mad confusion of wires, crisscrossing between buildings, haphazardly spanning the road. Looping crazily around trees, climbing drunkenly to rooftops, this mad confusion seemed to have trapped the neighborhood in its web. Bottle, please, called Nariman from inside. Yezid straightened from the railing he was leaning on, and turned his head. A ragged eye of crows cawed through the tangle in the sky. He waited, Nariman called again. Should he? It was not his job, he had made it clear to Roxana, at least this one thing he would be RM about, and she would be home shortly, in any case. The twilight was crowded now with birds racing against the evening and bats welcoming the darkness. He watched them utter back and forth, ba ed within the hurdle of wires. Please, I need my bottle. The words drifted rudderless through the room. Moments later, Jangir approached his father timidly on the balcony. Daddy, I think Grandpa wants to do susu. Yes, I heard. Mummy will be back soon, said Yezid, and made him return to his books. Nariman appealed again, louder now. The bottle, please. I'm bloated. His tired voice trailed away and was silent for a while, then started once more. Roxana heard the plea from the front room as soon as her foot was in the door. Is everyone gone deaf? She demanded. Poor Papa needs to do susu. What did you want me to do? Asked Yezad. Give him the bottle, what else? Play cricket with him, she said, picking up the urinal. He shook his head. I've never asked you to help me. Can't you at least help Papa when I'm out? He shook his head again. I told you the day the chief came here, I warned the boys also, no touching the bedpan or bottle. What is so bad about the bottle? I keep it clean and hygienic. She said perhaps he should try to remember the teachings of Gandhiji, that there was nothing nobler than the service of the weak, the old, the unfortunate. T. He told her not to bring Gandhiji into it, not one thing he taught had worked for India. He gave away Pakistan and left the country with problems. You sound like those RSS fanatics, trying to blame a saint. Instead of getting upset about the bottle, be glad our children can learn about old age, about caring, it will prepare them for life, make them better human beings. First they should learn about fun and happiness, and enjoy their youth. Lots of time to learn about sickness and dying. No time like the present. It's a chance to practice kindness every day, like Daisy practices her violin. If they learn kindness, happiness will follow. And one day, when we are old and helpless, they'll not turn their backs on us. Yazid said he hoped the day would never come when they placed such a heavy load on their sons. He would make sure to arrange their heirs more wisely, so they wouldn't end up without a rupee to their name when they were old. He crows were cawing, the parrot screeched across the road, the vendors sang on the pavement, breakfast was almost ready. Murad had nished his bath, and was putting on his uniform in the back room. But Jangir refused to open his eyes till his father, shaking his shoulder, said he would be late for school. I'm not feeling well. What's wrong? Stomach's hurting. Are you sure? Not because of Miss Alvarez? No, it's really hurting. Miss Alvarez is a very kind teacher, you'll be all right. While his father went to bathe, Jangir took out his Lake Como jigsaw puzzle and tried pleading with his mother. She was more sympathetic. Didn't you sleep, Jihangu? Such dark circles under your eyes. His conscience kept him awake, yelled Yezed from the bathroom as he undressed. Which is good, it means it's in working condition. He continued to call out encouragement over the clatter of mug against pail and the splashing water. But Jangir stopped listening. He wanted to escape into the Lake Como puzzle. Its familiar landscape was far less complicated than his real world. 1,272 pieces, the lid declared, making it his most decollete jigsaw. The colors moved in gradations so subtle that the blue of the sky melted into the lake, cerulean, he remembered Grandpa's word, and the deep dark greens could be tree foliage or part of the dense shrubbery hugging the hills. Their reluctance to yield their secrets was their charm. He treasured his fragments in the cardboard box. And when the lake began to emerge, and the path along its shore, he would be gone, into the puzzle, walking alongside the peasant girl who led, by its muzzle, a donkey pulling the jingling cart piled high with hay, down the road that curved and disappeared into the wooded hills. Piece by piece he would build his refuge, enjoy the lake breeze and golden sunlight on his face, feel the lush grass under his feet, smell the fragrance in the air. The last was the most elusive, he discovered. There were no pieces to tie together to make a fragrance. It was nowhere in the landscape, and everywhere. He had to imagine the fresh air that would linger over the path inside the jigsaw puzzle. And birdsong, where there was fresh air, instinct told him there was bound to be birdsong. Not the raucous cawing of scavenger crows, but birdsong like his father's whistling, bold and sweet. His father's whistling, that could banish unhappiness, even the memory of unhappiness. His father's whistle was invincible, it oat over him like a cheerful umbrella, and when he held his hand and they walked under it, the world was safe and wonderful. Jangir loved him then, and didn't want to be anyone but his father's son, not even if he could have switched places with one of the famous five. Across the road, the parrot screeched again. He began throwing the pieces back into the box. It was hopeless, the jigsaw was not working for him. His father came into the front room with his towel around him and a inger in his ear, trying to dislodge the water blocking it. Tell me, Jihangla, how many days can you stay home to avoid Miss Alvarez? I told you my stomach hurts. He could smell the scent of simple soap on his father's skin. It will stop hurting if you go to school. Trust me. Ignore those bad boys, do your lessons as always, and you'll be any. Water dripped from his father's head onto the lid of the jigsaw puzzle. Jangir moved it out of the way. His father went into the back room to put on his pants, returning with the towel over his head to dry his hair. You're a RSD class student, Jihangla, you have nothing to be afraid of. He left the damp towel around his neck and placed his arm over Jangir's shoulder. You know what your name means? He shook his head. It means conqueror of the world. Jangir was impressed. He looked up and smiled weakly at his father. The scattered curls of his chest hair were still damp. A stomach ache cannot stop the conqueror of the world. His father patted his back and told him to get dressed. Murad came into the front room with his school tie slung loose. around his collar. What does my name mean? He asked. You are a boon, a blessing, said his father. And Mummy's name? Roxana means the dawn. And yours? Guardian angel. Come here, let me X your tie. Jangir wondered about these names as he watched his father make the knot, while Murad kept asking for more meanings. Grandpa's was especially complicated, from the Shahnama story, and Daddy tried to remember the lineage of the hero, Rustam, whether Nariman was the great or the great-great-grandfather. Then Grandpa, who'd just woken up, told them the answer, great-grandfather. Their names taken together, thought Jangir, made the perfect family. They were blessed, they possessed the whole world, they had their own guardian angel, and Mummy's dawn light shone upon all of them. Yet Mummy and Daddy were guiding and unhappy. And though you might not know it now, these are your happy days, your school days, said Daddy, talking to both of them. Before you know it, they'll slip through your fingers. And when you're older you'll remember them with longing, you'll yearn for them to return. But they won't. So grab them now and enjoy them. Jangir wanted to believe his father, but RST the world that had fallen apart had to be pieced together again. He wished it was like making a jigsaw puzzle, open the box, reconstruct Grandpa's at in Chateau Felicity, ex-Grandpa's bones, patch up the quarrel with Kumi Auntie and Jal Uncle. And most important of all, peace. Together the lovely mornings of story and laughter and joking, which seemed to have disappeared so completely. Yazid saw the boys out to school with extra hugs. At the door, he kissed their foreheads. Then he returned to the dining table. He sat there dreaming, picturing his sons in the doorway where they had just waved goodbye. Growing up so fast. Seemed like yesterday Murad was starting kindergarten and Jangir was crawling in diapers. And look at them now. To think he had created them, he and Roxy, these two beautiful sons of theirs. Then he sternly reminded himself, every dog and cat could reproduce, he had not invented the process or done something unique. It was this kind of sloppy thinking that made population control impossible in this country. But his sense of wonder returned despite his very sensible view of the subject. And, lost in his thoughts, he began whistling softly sunrise, sunset. Roxana recognized the tune and came to sit beside him. He stopped, and she stroked his arm. What are you thinking, Yezda? Nothing important. Tell me. He sighed. I was watching the boys get ready, thinking they looked so handsome in their uniforms. She smiled. And I was remembering the years when they were small, how I'd carry them in my arms and on my shoulders, and the games we played. I could never do that now. And then I thought of that song. The one when Tevi and his wife are at their daughter's wedding, you remember the LM? Roxana nodded. She marries the tailor. Yes. And Tevi is watching the ceremony, he looks in wonder at his grown-up child and the bridegroom. And that made me think, one day Murad and Jangir will be married, we'll be watching the ceremony. And afterwards we'll be old and alone. Don't be silly, Yezda. They'll always be our sons. No. They'll be their wives' husbands. I've never heard you so sentimental before, she said. What's the matter with you, these days? He remained silent. Then he drew her close and put his arm around her. Kapoor circled the parcel like a little boy guiding the temptation to open his gift before the appointed hour. Inside was the special ball for the Christmas window. He and Yezad awaited the peon's return from an errand. Hussein will be disappointed if we do it without him, said Mr. Kapoor, playing a forward defensive stroke with his imaginary bat. Absorbed in his thoughts, Yezad nodded without listening. He had made his decision. Before the day was over, he would again attempt to pin Mr. Kapoor down, ask him when he was going to start campaigning full-time. Extract some commitment from him. You're really enjoying this Christmas tamasha, aren't you? He tried as an opener. You know my policy. In our cosmopolitan shop, we honor all festivals, they all celebrate our human and divine natures. More the merrier. Smiling his cheerful, humanity-embracing smile, Mr. Kapoor stood beside the window, looking out into the road over Santa Claus's shoulder. He nodded at passers-by, waved at the Paw Bhajiwala, yelled out good morning to an acquaintance. Your policy is absolutely correct, said Yezid. This city is a miracle of tolerance. And it must stay that way. You're starting to sound like me, said Mr. Kapoor, amused by the earnest tone. Well, I've been listening to you for 15 years, said Yezid, and they laughed. Look, there's Hussein. They waved to hurry him on. And to entertain them, the peon acted a run like a toddler on unsteady feet. Chelo, Mayan, the special ball has come. Mr. Kapoor tore away the protective padding and held up the custom-designed prop. Made of a round light bulb, it was the bright red color of a new cricket ball, with rows of stitches painted along its circumference to resemble the seam. So? What do you think? I think it's brilliant, said Yezid. He'd use this new ball like a pace bowler exploiting the shine, he thought. He'd try Yorkers, googles, full tosses, whatever it took to get Mr. Kapoor's wicket. Wait till you see it in action, even more brilliant than it looks. Mr. Kapoor rummaged in the packaging for the cord and socket. It's synchronized with the motor for Santa's arm. Every time the bat approaches the ball, it lights up. Good, let's connect it. The sooner it got working, the better, then the boss would be at his mellowest, ready to be generous when they discussed the terms. Mr. Kapoor had brought a spool of transparent thread from his wife's sewing basket. He unraveled a length and tied the end to the socket, to suspend it from the ceiling. I'll go up the ladder, volunteered Yezid. It's a very delicate job. Too close, and the bat will smash the bulb. Too far, and it won't look realistic. From the top of the ladder, he let the bulb descend to within a foot of the oar, steadying his hand against the ceiling. How's that? Little lower, said Mr. Kapoor. I want it to appear like it's going to connect with the sweet spot. Yezid allowed 2 more inches of thread to slip between his fingers. This window is going to attract hordes of people. We'll need a special Havalder for crowd control. I hope so. Little bit to the left. You know, Mr. Kapoor, you should take this opportunity to publicize your own name in the display. A sign saying, Compliments of the season, from Vikram Kapoor, proprietor. No, that would look cheap. Yezad tried again to ease into the topic. At least put a campaign slogan in the window. A vote for Vikram Kapoor is a vote for Santa Claus. Or, hit a sixer, vote Vikram Kapoor. Good one, Yezid, he attempted a laugh. But there isn't going to be an election. Yezid heard the note of unease. He moved the string more to the left and forward, following the guiding hand below. Of course there is. Not for me. I don't think I'm going to run. The transparent string escaped Yezid's fingers. The bulb fell to the oar and shattered. Oh no. Mr. Kapoor jumped back to avoid the glass. Yezid's hands were shaking as he came down the ladder. Apologizing, he heard his own voice as though it was a stranger's. But why not, Mr. Kapoor? You dropped the ball. Oh Yezid. I'm sorry, Mr. Kapoor. But please tell me, now I'll have to order another one. He walked in disgust. It'll take 3 or 4 days to come. You're not listening to me, Vikram. I'm asking you why not. Mr. Kapoor looked at him, then turned and faced the window again. 4 days Santa Claus has been swatting air with his bat, he grumbled. 5 days I waited for that ball. Distressed as Yezid was, he knew Mr. Kapoor needed to be pacey edition. Maybe we can put in a regular bulb for the time being, he suggested. That will look more ridiculous, muttered Mr. Kapoor. But after moping for a while, he agreed to try it. Hussein went to fetch a spare bulb from the storage room. I don't understand, ventured Yezid. With all your plans and preparations, the manifesto you told me you wrote, now why are you changing your mind? Lots of reasons. It's too complicated. I think it's unrealistic of me to hope to. He broke and looked away, but Yezid could see the sheepish expression re-acted in the window glass. It's too dangerous. My wife made a good point. She said elections these days are nothing better than GHTS between gangsters. And after thinking about it, I have to agree with her. Besides, she's worried about my blood pressure. Toying with the bulb socket, he seemed to want to explain further when Hussein returned, dragging a broom behind him and waving a 60-watt bulb. Look, Sahab, I found it. Mr. Kapoor appeared relieved at the interruption. He busied himself in the window. The peon swept up the bits of red glass that were scattered around like drops of blood. The cotton wool and tinsel and holly, shaken out, dislodged more droplets. When they were through, Mr. Kapoor inserted the bulb in the socket and started the motor. The bat descended, the light came on, the bat rose, the bulb went oh. Hussein cheered like a spectator in the stands at Wankhede Stadium, to try and make his employer smile. But the substitute bulb's thin yellow light had jaundiced the mood. How could Mr. Kapoor let him down in such a no-hand manner, despaired Yezid. Wife said no. Was that any kind of explanation? For the rest of the day he struggled with a sense of hopelessness. He felt anger and betrayal, till calmer moments prevailed and he saw how irrational he was being. Mr. Kapoor knew nothing really about his decolletage. Perhaps he needed to conda in Mr. Kapoor, tell him why his decision not to run was such a profound disappointment, that he had pinned all his hopes on the promotion. He would have to swallow his pride and confess that it had become impossible to make ends meet on his salary, 2 children, school expenses, prices rising month by month. And now, to add to that, sick father-in-law who'd been kicked out by his stepson and stepdaughter, no room in my tiny at, and no money for medicines, plus bedpans stinking in the front room. Causing quarrels with my wife, but I feel obligated to him because he bought the at for us when we got married. Yezid put a hand to his forehead. No, the entire story was too messy. Much too messy to tell someone who was ultimately a stranger when it came to revealing all these personal family matters. Through the afternoon, he watched the spasmodic Santa struggling with arthritic shoulders. Every once in a while the little motor malfunctioned, then the bulb blinked rapidly and the bat made little tremulous up and down movements. Like Santa has Parkinson's, he thought. Hussein ran to fetch Mr. Kapoor, who in turn ran to reset the switch. After an adjustment, Mr. Kapoor issued a stylish thumbs-up signal and returned to his OCE. The bat resumed normal operation. The slow strobe of the light bulb began to cast a hypnotic spell over Yezid as the hours wore on. He felt immobilized, like the reindeer in their elding positions, and the frozen wicketkeeper ever ready to stump Captain Claus and yell house at to the invisible umpire. But the challenge was never sounded. And the longer Yezid gazed at the idiotic tableau, the more depressed he became. Nothing made sense. Suddenly, his life seemed to him as meager as poor Villy Cardmaster's, going from the lovely little pink-frocked girl in the birthday photo, eyes shining with innocent hope, to the woman she now was. He tore his eyes away from the mesmeric Santa and watched Hussein instead. The peon stopped frequently to adjust a shred of cotton wool, a plastic leaf, a strand of tinsel. Yezid envied his ability to delight in simple things. What was his secret? Hussein's life, ravaged by the nightmare of his family's murder, was still able to end pleasure in all this tawdry paraphernalia. Like Mr. Kapoor, who emerged from his OCE, smiled forgivingly at Yezid, and went to the window display where he stood grinning for a few moments before returning to his desk.